Hey guys, welcome at these informations about how to start up a vintage car engine after 10-15 years of standing without running the car. There are a few things to consider here, and my Triumph Spitfire is the best object to show you these items. I own this car about 20 years and it didn't run for about 17 years. And at my opinion, it's no good idea just to turn the ignition key and crank the engine. There is possibly rust between the piston rings and the cylinder liners. There is possibly no oil support, and in this case a major damage of the engine would be the result. So the first thing we should make sure is a sufficient oil pressure and a good oil flow, a good oil circulation that reach any part of the engine. I said before, don't crank the car just without doing this, because you could ruin the cylinder liners or the pistons. This is a picture, for example, just for illustration. So, and that also means that the valve train of the car will be oiled. Aircraft engines, vintage aircraft engines, they have a pre-oiling system. We didn't have it, our vintage cars, and our old-timers, we have to check out by ourselves. So screw out the ignition plugs, because the combustion pressure would put additional load at the bearings. And this is to avoid if maybe after 15 years of standing there wouldn't be too much oil in the gaps between the bearings and the crankshaft. After screwing out the spark plugs, put spray oil to the spark plug holes into the combustion chamber to oil the piston rings. This could be avoid damage for the first start. Next step is under bypassing the oil pressure light in the cockpit. I don't trust it when the car is standing so long. Just go with a multimeter directly to the oil pressure switch, like I do. This switch makes a connection if the oil pressure rises. The switch will cut off a connection between mass and this contact. So I connect the contact and the mass of the car and check out the electrical resistance by this multimeter. When the oil pressure is sufficient, the multimeter shows resistance of infinity resistance. That means the switch is off. This is what you see when you turn on the ignition key. As long as the engine is standing, you will have electrical contact to mass, and the oil pressure light will be shining. Okay. I also bypass the ignition key, and you see I make the direct connection. Next thing, I unscrew the oil pressure switch to make sure there is oil in the oil gallery. I also pull the distributor to see physically oil coming up to the drive gear. And for sure, we don't need the old oil filter, and we don't need the old oil. When this oil will be in your engine about 15 years, it's done. There is a lot of acid, of dirt, of unburned fuel probably, and all the things the oil will take during the running process. We change it. Better would have been to change it before you store a car, buy new oil, but I forgot. There is no doubt this oil is done. I replace this oil and the oil filter, I replaced the oil by a 5W30 synthetic oil. But just for the starts and for the tuning of the engine. Why do? I sure know these old vintage engines would need a 20W50 mineralic oil, but the synthetic oil has a high cleaning efficiency for carbon. Before I would take the first ride of the car, I will change for the correct oil. But I want to clean it up in the inside. This synthetic oil is anti-corrosive, and if you take a look to the rocker arms and the other stuff of the valve train or the sprockets you see here in the distributor hole, there was been a bit of rust. Okay, now I can ensure there will be oil pressure. Indeed, you've seen I loosened the oil filter a bit. And here you see the rust I talk about. The synthetic oil will derust all this stuff. Next thing we want to check is the ignition timing, and if there is a sufficient spike. And in this case too, I don't trust the ignition switch. I put the 12 volt plus terminal directly to the ignition coil for sufficient electrical supply. Okay, in this stage, as you see, spark plugs being back again, and the compression pressure of the displacement engine will result in a higher torque for cranking, and so it's no bad idea to buy a new battery. In this case, it can be the cheapest one for our vintage cars. In the case of a modern car with its consumption management, don't know its exactly word, with all the computers, you have to buy the one with a correct serial number. However, okay. Plus terminal always first. If I ever ask why this rule, imagine if you make a short circuit with your spanner to mass, nothing would happen if you start with plus. There's no connection to mass. Okay, now we check if there is an spike at the breaker contact, and I make a separate video about this. Okay, I also bypass for my first running the fuel pump and the tank. If you start your car after 15 years, straight away it could happen that a lot of rust and debris will reach the fuel pump and damage it, and you don't know why your car isn't starting. These are the typical British SU carburetors, and as you see, I filled the float chamber bowls with fuel, and I check out if this fuel is going to the needles of the damper pistons. For those of you who not familiar with this kind of carburetors, they are similar to motorcycle carburetors, but the pistons will be pulled up by the low pressure in the orifice of the carburetor and following. So this is a good example what could happen to your fuel system by condensation if the car was standing for about 10 or 15 or 20 years. I go to ultrasonic clean the carburetors, but for the first try I just cleaned it with vacuum cleaner. Once again, you see the debris and all the stuff inside the float chamber bowl, and you can imagine if you try to firing up a car like this straight away, it wouldn't start. But for the first step, like I said, we just clean it up. I also bypass the crankcase ventilation. These are the two black hoses coming out from the carburetor bodies, and they sucking usually the crankcase ventilation, the blow-by between the piston rings and the liners. There always will be a blow-by, and if there is if they are leaking, it would result in failures too. As you've seen, my philosophy is just to bypass everything, and when the car is running, I'm gonna reconnect it, and if the car still is running, this system is okay for about ignition key, ignition lock. However, and as you see, the engine needs some additional fuel, like a baby needs a bottle. And with this green line, I bypass the solenoid. I don't use the ignition key, like I said. Okay, what I pulled under the carburetors, these are the jets, and in this case, in this carburetor, the choke will be working by pulling down these jets a bit, jet orifices. And as you see, oil pressure is coming up now at the valve train 2. This is very important. Check this. I have an issue at my Chrysler Windsor. There is no support to the valve train, to the rocker arms. Not good. Maybe in the next video about this issue. And now the car is running somehow satisfying. We can refill the fuel to the tank, reconnect the fuel pump, and this was for me surprising. The fuel pump did work after refueling after this 17 years without any failures. This was surprising. And don't forget to drain some additives for the valve seats, some lead additive, because these ancients didn't have valve seat rings, hardened ones, and it could result in a damage. Usually these areas will be hammered by the valves very hard and nothing going to happen, but just to ensure. The lead is lubrication for the valve seat areas. And always keep an eye on at the coolant and refill. Don't forget, so you're happy the car is running, and while you're happy, the cylinder head gasket will be damaged. Okay, last pictures. See my son.